right, we're back and let's talk about learning context. So, the success of a training program is dependent on a few factors. One is the principles of instructional design, right? So, the training program needs to be designed, it needs to be well designed, following the principles of instructional design. So, for example, all the activities need to be developed and coordinated to support the trainees' learning processes. You want to make sure that whoever is designing the program, whether it's the person who's administering it or it's somebody else, has the overarching goals in mind when they're developing the training, and that everything that happens in the training is directly tied to the learning goals, and designed in a way that supports the learner's learning process, right? Because if you present material in a way that people can't really process or encode, it's not going to be well remembered. So the elements of instructional design would be determining what is going to be learned, like what is the big picture, and it might take days or weeks to get all of the what covered, right? In a college class, it takes 10 weeks to get through all of the what that's being covered, right? So you have to figure out the cognitive components of what's to be taught. You have to figure out any psychomotor things. Do people need to be flipping levers or turning knobs or doing something with their bodies? And then, of course, any social components that need to be taught, any interactive things, any awareness of like knowing your chain of command might be part of training, right? And that's a social element. Knowing how to approach somebody to discuss a topic. Maybe that's part of the organizational culture, and you want people to talk about things in the same ways. And so you would train those things, and we want to make sure that we have all of those elements being covered. The other element is what we call planned evaluation. As a student, you might call it testing. But whether you're giving answers on a Scantron sheet or bubbling things on the internet or showing that you know how to run the machine, these are all examples of planned evaluation, right? I will know that you have internalized what I taught in the training course when you can display it in whatever method we're using to evaluate your knowledge, evaluate your skill or whatever. So we want to follow these basic principles of instructional design. We also need to keep in mind the characteristics of the trainee and the trainer, right? So trainee characteristics that are important for being able to learn are readiness. Do you feel like you have the background knowledge to be ready to learn this next thing? Self-efficacy. Do you have a sense that you can do this? Or do you feel like you're being pushed into things that you're not ready for? Motivation to learn. Do you want to be at this training? Do you want these new skills? Or are you like, I was perfectly happy not having to do this. I don't want to. Motivation is an important factor in learning. I think you know that. Trainer characteristics. One is they need to have specific objectives. I was just listening to a story yesterday where they were talking about taking a language training class, and the teacher spent a lot of time talking about unrelated issues, talking about things that had nothing to do with the language they were learning, the predominant cultures where it came from. These were not the topics of conversation. The topics of conversation were unrelated. Well, even if you bring it back and it's now you're back to talking about the topic, you've a lot of times lost your learner. A lot of times if you don't stick to the specific objectives, the learner feels like you're wasting their time. Understanding learning styles. Now, I want to be really careful when I say learning styles, because a lot of times people in my classes have been trained on what learning styles are, and they think that what I'm talking about is like visual learner or auditory learner or kinesthetic learner. It turns out research has shown that there's no such thing as people who learn kinesthetically or auditorily or whatever. I know for me, if I hear something, I'm much more likely to remember it than if I read it. I will agree to that. I would even label it, I'm an auditory learner. But what the research shows is that people, I'm an auditory learner, but I also like these kinds of pictures. Like this helps me to organize what's happening. So I'm not a non-visual learner. And so that's the thing, is that you shouldn't tailor anything to one learning type thinking that's who you have. So we're not talking about that. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that different people process information differently, and we need to be able to present information in ways that is accessible to different strategies that people might be imposing on that material. So having, a white background, black font, bullet point list, and that's it, nothing else, no other background or anything else to like engage or open up to freedom of processing or anything like that, is probably not the best idea for a lot of learners. A lot of learners need things to be sort of a little bit more flexible. So having a flexible presentation is probably important. Having good communication skills. I mean, we've all had those awful... I was just in a meeting where the person who was running the meeting was muttering so much and speaking so, like, as he'd be going on, I'm like, why are you talking like that? What is happening? Having that kind of communication skill is not great. For one thing, in his case, it was kind of conveying lack of energy, not really wanting to be in the meeting that he was running. Not a good message to be sending to the rest of us who dragged ourselves to the meeting. So good communication skills that convey confidence, that convey openness, right? These kinds of things, being able to speak without a lot of, these fillers, like what I just said, those things. Although research has shown that those fillers give the listener a moment of rest too. And so it's actually not as harmful. I'm just saying a lot of it. Having a lot, like that is distracting. So that's what I'm talking about. Having flexible strategies, not just in response to a person's question either. A lot of times teachers assume that if no one's raising their hand, it must mean that everybody's getting it, when what might be happening is that nobody wants to raise their hand. Nobody wants to raise their hand. And so if the teacher automatically knows to maybe give examples, or here it is written, but let me explain it in other words, and or let me let you engage with the content or whatever, those kinds of flexible strategies help to ensure that you get to all of your learners. One way or another, they're all going to ultimately hit on something that okay, now I get it, kind of thing. All right, and then finally, the basic principles of learning. As I already defined, learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior that occurs as a result of experience or practice. So we want to make sure that the training program is based on the good principles of instructional design, taking into account the characteristics of the trainee and the trainer, and that it follows the basic principles of learning. So what are those? Maybe you've had a class that's exclusively on learning. Maybe you had conditioning and learning or something like that. Or maybe you only remember it from introductory psychology. It's a chapter in that textbook. Let's talk about how those concepts that you might have learned in these other classes apply to the learning of cognitive things or work-related things. All right. So one big principle of learning is the idea of active learning. And so you as a student, it's really on you to be active, right? As a student, it's up to you to be listening, to be thinking of your own examples that relate to what's being provided in class and those kinds of things like that. Active learning is on the student side. Okay. So hopefully you have learners in your training program that are actively attempting to learn. Okay. What about, should we teach everything all at one time, teach the whole lesson all at one time, or should we break it up into parts? So it makes the most sense to do one big training if the content is highly organized, it's really coherent, and it consists of independent tasks that the individual can do on their own. You would be best advised to use like little bits of training, not do it in one big session for really complex material, for the kind of material that can easily be divided up into little bits. I'll give you a couple of examples of what I mean by that. Like, let's say that you are The training is about how to learn the new choreography for this spring's musical. Okay. So it's probably best to break up the choreography into its parts, right? Because if you have a pretty big number that's going to take 2 minutes to perform, it's probably going to take a week to learn the full routine. It's going to take a while, right? So you break that complex series of movements into sets of 8, or the chorus, or something like that. Something that's easily divided. We're going to focus on this part right now. A lot of times when you're teaching a person who doesn't know how to dance, you start with just the feet. Your feet are going to be doing this. Okay, now that you've got your feet doing that, I want you to add in what your hands are going to be doing. Okay, now that you got what your hands are doing, I want you to put your hips into it, like that. Breaking it down into easily dividable tasks like that makes sense to break it into parts. On the other hand, there are certain kinds of material that if we were to take a break, you may lose everything that you have gained up till this point, right? And so that kind of really highly organized, coherent, interdependent kinds of things. I think I mistyped that. It should say interdependent tasks. If you were to break it up, tomorrow when we come back for phase 2 of this training, we may have forgotten, or we can't remember how we got to where we are when we're ready to leap off to the next part. So it really is a function of the kind of material that you're teaching, whether you want to break it up into parts or you want to have one big get through this all right now kind of training session. Which kind of brings us up, I'm kind of overlapping the idea of, do I teach it all at once or do I break it into sessions? We tend to find that organizations like massed training, because they're like, let's just get this over with in 1 4-hour session one day. Let's get a giant auditorium, stick the entire workforce in there, and we're all doing our training at one time. Organizations like that because it's efficient. You don't lose people's labor during the time that everybody's getting trained. But if you really want your learners to remember the material over time, you want to go with the distributed approach where you do it in small sessions. If it's something that can be broken down in particular, there's a reason why college classes are 50 minutes generally, and that's because you will remember that material better when it's in little bits than if we sat for 5 solid hours per week. I guess it's not 5 solid hours. It'd be 5 times 50 minutes. So it's 250 minutes. So that's, I don't know, how much is that? It's more than 2 hours. It's more than 4 hours. Not quite 5. It's not quite 5 hours. It's 5 hours minus 50 minutes. I don't know. Is that 4 hours and 10 minutes? Psychology math. I can't do it. But we break it up into those smaller bits because those really massed sessions are really tough. Over in the Bellevue program, when we teach a face-to-face class, it starts at 5:30 p.m. and might go till 9:50 p.m. And that's not even the full amount of time that you're supposed to be in a 5-credit class. It's technically a hybrid class because that's not the full amount of time that you're supposed to be there. But I have to tell you, I taught there for 10 years. Yeah, 10 years I taught there. And we started at 5:30, even though I gave everybody breaks every hour. So I would teach for 50 minutes. We take a 10-minute break, teach for 50 minutes, take a 10-minute break, teach for 50 more minutes. And people were done. Three of those sessions, and they were like, please, can we go home? And it was only 8:30 in the evening, but they were like exhausted. It's a lot to do it in that kind of massed approach. So if you really want the learners to remember, you want to go distributed. Meaningfulness. Providing an overview of the material helps to give that sense of where we're going and what this is about. If you can present job-related examples, if you can show that the things we're teaching you right now directly apply to your job, people are much more likely to remember it. If you can sequence the material logically, people are more likely to remember it. So those are some factors that we can implement as far as meaningfulness. Practice and overlearning is a really important aspect of any training. A lot of times people will practice till they get to the point of what they call a perfect practice. I did it right once. I'm going to stop. That's not when you should stop. And this is true for you studying. If you have like a flashcards or whatever you use to study, a lot of times people will go through the flashcards until they finally got every single one of them right, and they go, okay, good, I'm going to stop. That's a perfect practice. But what you really want to do is keep going until you get to the point of overlearning. So now you've gotten to the point where I can say it without even necessarily thinking about it anymore. Now you've really encoded the material, and most of us don't do it. Most of us don't overlearn. You probably did it if you were ever in any kind of performance, because whoever was running the thing made you keep practicing past when you thought you had it. If you ever did anything performing, you know what I'm talking about. Your coach or your director or whoever made you keep practicing, even though you were like, I've already had a perfect practice. I don't need to do it anymore. And thank goodness they made you practice to the point of overlearning, because now you could perform in front of an audience and you don't choke because you really don't have it down well enough to be able to do it while also being nervous, right? So thank goodness you over practice so that you wouldn't have that problem. So overlearning is really an important goal for training. All right, I'm going to stop here and we'll come back in the next and we'll wrap this up with feedback. All right.